Hi, I'm Tim May. Welcome to Acoustic Music Pro. This is developing speed, accuracy, and tone for the mandolin. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about a lot of different ways of getting really good tone, how to relax, make things really flow nicely. So we want a lot of economy of motion in what we do. If you're relaxed, the listener will hear that, and you'll just be able to play for longer periods of time, hopefully for the rest of your life for a long time. So we'll get started here, and we'll start off with just basic stuff, and we'll work our way up. Thanks for joining us. The two pick strokes that we're going to need to use are the rest stroke and the swing stroke. Now the swing stroke is one that you may already do, and that's where we are basically, let's say if we're playing the third string, we're picking in such a way that we are clearing the string 2 and string 4. So if this is our string 3 that we were just playing, our pick is swinging this way so that it doesn't run in a straight line and hit strings 2 and 4. So we call that the swing stroke. And when you're playing eighth notes like fiddle tune notes or any kind of linear scale type thing where you're playing continuously, that's probably the stroke you're going to use. But we also need to know about the rest stroke, and this is one of the most powerful strokes that you can use. This is where I'm going to play, for example, the fourth string, and my pick would be resting on the third string. So the concept comes from classical guitar players, where if they play a string, say string 3 with their finger, they would be resting on string 4. Bass players have the same idea, same concept. So we're using it with a flat pick. Again, you're playing on string 4, and you should be resting on string 3. The same idea if I play string 3, should be resting on string 2. String 2 should be resting on string 1. Now when I play string 1, you're probably saying, well, what is it supposed to rest on? There's no string below it. Well, you should develop this feel for how far your pick should travel, and it would be the same idea. You should develop this feel for this distance from strings 2 to 1 should be the same for 1, even though there's no string below it, right? So I don't hit the first string and come down here, right? Should be about the same. Now the idea of the rest stroke is not that it's some rule we made up that you have to land on the string below it. It's the ultimate follow through. Same way that a tennis player, if he stops his swing right here, he's not going to have the same power as if he follows through, right? That's the same thing that's happened here. It's what we call staying in the string. And so when my pick is landing on the third string has nothing to do with anything. It just means that I can visually see that I've played through the fourth string correctly. What we're doing with this fourth string is we're putting the pressure on it, and then we are snapping it just like you're pulling a bow, and you're going to snap that string, and you're really pushing it out of the way. If you're not doing this correctly, what you will be doing is if this is the string, you would be playing the string and just pulling off it with your pick like this, sideways. You wouldn't be getting any purchase on the string, you wouldn't be getting that snap. With the rest stroke, you push the string out of the way, and not only that, you're snapping it with the edge of your pick and giving it that tone. So that's the sound you hear when you play a rest stroke. It seems like an easy concept, and the concept is easy, but in the middle of the battle as you're playing, you will tend to not do it. Now on mandolin, it's not as important as it is on instruments like guitar, dobro, strings that have a little more bass in, but it is a big deal for us too, because it's the most powerful thing we can play, and it's also the most articulate note we can play. So even when I'm playing very quietly, still playing rest strokes. Really, for any note that I can play that's a quarter note or longer, that's kind of the rule, the general rule for when you play a rest stroke. Okay, quarter note or longer, and when it becomes eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3, and really it becomes too fast to do the rest stroke, because the rest stroke is a downstroke, right? Where we're playing through the string. When it comes too fast to do that, I'm going to play eighth notes, and I'm going to play my swing stroke, because that's the only way I can get speed is to do that. Okay. Now you can play a downstroke without it being a rest stroke. Because I could play a downstroke swing stroke, right? That's really what I'm doing when I play the swing stroke. I'm playing down, up, down, up. So I could play a downstroke swing stroke. Now the weakest thing I could play would be an upstroke. What you want to do is try to get your upstroke as close to your downstroke as you can. You can get it close, but you'll never get it perfect because it's just not as powerful a stroke. You don't have gravity in your thumb and all that leaning into it. So from weakest to strongest, you're going to have upstroke, swing stroke, downstroke, swing stroke, downstroke, rest stroke. So that's the most powerful thing you can play. And when you watch bluegrass mandolin players, especially guys like Bill Monroe, lots of downstrokes, even at pretty high speeds, because he just knew that was the most powerful thing he could play. Even electric guitar players, even it still translates into a lot of power to play a lot of downstrokes like Johnny B. Good. So that's sort of the hierarchy of power: upstroke, downstroke, downstroke, rest stroke. So keep that in mind, and we will now move on. All right, let's wrap up our discussion of the right hand. We tend to spend more time on the right hand than anything else when it comes to speed, accuracy, and tone, because our belief is that most of the problems that you run into are going to be with your right hand. Even if you think you have a left hand problem, it's probably your right hand not syncing up and playing in time enough for your left hand to even do what it needs to do. One of the main things that you want to keep in mind about the right hand is consistency, of course. Find you one spot you like. We talked about that earlier. Don't deviate from it unless you are just trying to create a different sound. If this is where I want to be right here, I want to get a little more bright, a little more sassy back here. I want to get mellower. I move, but I still have this place that I'm at all the time. Instrument always in the same position on me. Okay. Now you want to tend to think of your pick sort of moving through the string this way, evenly. You don't want to start doing this with your wrist. That's just wasted motion. I'm going to keep it pretty straight here. Now some players will play more with their elbow back here. Some will play more with their wrist this way, where they get more movement this way. And some of us, are just a combination of all those things. But you just don't want to get playing too much up this way. That didn't gain you very much. You only have a very little amount of that to play your swing stroke, where you're clearing the string around it. Again, we're playing the third string, for example. We play it just enough to clear the second, and I come back with my upstroke, and I clear it just enough to clear the one above that, which is the fourth string. You only want your swing strokes to just barely clear those, though. You don't want to come up here and clear too much. You're wasting energy. All right. Keep things consistent. Be always aware of where your right hand is, and if you have to look at a mirror, do that too. A lot of fiddle players have to look in the mirror because of the way the instrument sits. They can't see how far the bow is from the bridge. You may have to do the same thing. Keep in mind that the pendulum problem is going to tend to take your pick back toward the bridge further than it needs to. You're going to need to keep that straight. And even your line of vision can throw you off this way too, because you're looking straight down this way thinking I can play like this when you need to be playing against the grain that way or parallel to the bridge. All right. So now we'll move on to the left hand. So let's talk about the left hand. The main thing, of course, that we keep repeating is that you need to be relaxed. You don't need to put too much pressure on the fingerboard. If you can keep your right arm relaxed, a lot of times the left hand will follow suit. And if your right arm has a lot of tension, you'll tend to have a lot of tension in your left hand as well. So try to keep everything relaxed. One thing you can do that will help is to always press the string down as close to the fret as you can get. So you don't want to be in the middle of the fret, or the space between the frets, I guess technically, but because what's happening is the string is only registering from this metal fret to the bridge back here. So all you have to do is get the string down to that piece of metal. So if you're back here, you're not going to get as much power to get it down there. You can almost get right on top of the fret, believe it or not, and still get a really clean note. That'll help you a lot with tension, because you're wasting effort, put too much effort into in the fretting process itself if you don't do that. It's a good thing to keep in mind. The position of the thumb is a pretty big deal too. A lot of times you'll have, especially if you have bigger hands, your thumb may be kind of flopping around here. But basically, you want to have pressure between, ideally between your middle finger and your thumb. That's the most pressure you can generate. You don't get quite as much from any of the other fingers. So what you want to keep in mind is that if you can have your thumb opposite that middle finger at any given time, you're going to get the most pressure. And so the neck is just this piece of wood that's between there. So if I have my middle finger, say, fretting here, then my thumb would be sort of at the top of the neck, a little up from center, right? So a little bit, there's center, would be a little bit up from that because I want it to be opposite of the middle finger. If my middle finger were up here, then my thumb would drop below it again, and I'm keeping the neck in between, but I'm still basically trying to get that clamping pressure. If my middle finger were here and my thumb were here, I got nothing, right? I'm going to really fatigue, and we want to be able to play for a long time. That's not going to work for us. Now, again, if you have big hands, sometimes your thumb will flop around. There's certain chords you may make. It may get a little loose, but that's okay. Just keep all these things in mind that you want to get maximum pressure, especially if you're trying to reach pretty good stretches here. You can see where my thumb is there. It's right in the middle of the neck. My thumb's sort of pointing toward the peg head just a little bit. Okay, you don't want your thumb pointing away from the peg head or anything crazy like that, right? Always keep in mind too that if you are switching positions, if you're moving, that your thumb moves with you. In other words, don't have your thumb back here and say your fingers are here. So you can see my thumb there. You want it to be always, again, opposite the middle finger. That's the basic idea, okay? So if you were to slide like so, slide your thumb with it. Don't leave your thumb back here and slide up. Always keep that in mind, okay? One thing that you can keep in mind if you can't remember anything else about what your left hand is supposed to be doing regarding your thumb is at least keep what we call light in the tunnel back here behind the neck. So I don't want to just clamp it down like that, like a baseball bat, right? I want there to be some light between this part of my hand and the neck itself. So no matter what you do, if your thumb is flopping around, whatever's going on, just try not to have this happening. Sometimes you can have this part of your hand here at the base of your index finger supporting a little bit. It's not ideal, but you can get away with that sometimes if you're making chords that are kind of weird or they're kind of long stretches for you and your hand's not, maybe you got small hands or whatever. You can do that too, but again, just keep in mind, thumb opposite the middle finger, okay? One thing that's pretty neat about the mandolin is that each one of our 4 fingers on the left hand has a certain job to do. So if we're playing an open position, the index finger is going to take care of frets 1 and 2. The middle finger will take care of frets 3 and 4. Ring finger takes care of 5 and 6. And the pinky will take care of 7. Now if you're playing an open position, the 7th fret of the 4th string is a D note. So we already have a D open. So if you want to stay in open position, you wouldn't have to use your pinky here, right? That's the 7th fret G string. You wouldn't have to do that because you have an open D string. Where it does come into play is when we get to the E string, of course, and then we want to play, up the neck. We got to grab that B note with our pinky. Has more meaning there. There will be some closed position things that you could play where you're fingering every note with your left hand where you would have to have the pinky involved too. But at least at this point you know what its job is, right? So that's a pretty good thing. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out fingerings. If you come from another instrument like guitar or banjo or anything else that's a stringed instrument, you may not be used to playing using the same finger twice. In other words, if I'm playing G, B flat, B, technically I should be using the middle finger twice there to keep all my fingers in line. If you get used to doing that, things just always are going to make more sense to you. One important thing is to sync up your right hand and your left hand, get those synchronized. And that really is a lot of the problem we run into when we hear a really choppy sound. That kind of sound is really just a failure to have those synced up. But a lot of times it can be in your right hand, it's a timing problem with the right hand, but sometimes it can be that you're not squeezing every note, every juice out of every note that you're playing before you move on. It's almost like trying to throw a ball before you catch it. So what you want to do is think in terms of when you fret a note, play it and let it linger as long as you can before you move to the next note. And there will be a certain quickness that you move to the next note that allows you to keep this sort of fluid motion, right? One thing that can help you, at least if you're going down the scale here, here's a G scale, is to leave as many fingers down as you can. So I'm going to leave that finger down, go to the next note, leave as many fingers down as I can, right? That way you're not chopping this note off before you get to that one, okay? Keeping in mind, of course, you're playing on top of the fret, you're getting as close to the fret as you can as well. Even psychologically, if you just think about letting a note ring as long as you can, it'll help everything. I've seen people improve very quickly just from that, just from a psychological standpoint of even thinking about it. Again, usually we always say that even if you think you have a left-hand problem, it's a right-hand problem. It many times will be that you're just not catching up with your right hand when you're trying to play faster, or it could be any of those kinds of things. But that's a short wrap-up of the left hand. All right, I want to wrap up with a little discussion about joint movement itself and how to try to maximize that. A baseball player has a lot of joints moving when like a pitcher when he throws a ball. A lot of things are moving. It's like cracking of a whip. So it's kind of the same thing that we want to look for here, where we don't want to just have one joint doing all the work. It usually is a combination of a lot of different things. Some people play more from the elbow. Some people play more from the wrist. Now, the thumb movement is, let me start with that. You can actually have a lot of movement in your thumb this way. And some players will actually, as they flex their thumb, they will be rotating the pick forward or backward. And we talked about that earlier in the angling of your pick, how you can create a warmer sound or gain speed. So you can be playing flat against the string with your pick and using thumb movement, flexing of your thumb, roll the pick forward or backward, and a lot of great players actually do that, believe it or not. But it's not something you would necessarily have to do. You wouldn't necessarily have to get a bunch of thumb movement to be a great player. You may get more of it from your wrist this way. Okay. Some players can actually play very well again from their elbow, leaving everything very stiff except for the elbow movement here. Okay, so it can just be a combination of those things. You want to just find out what's fatiguing you and see if you can change things. We did mention earlier that you don't want to get too much of this going. You don't want to rotate too much, but you may need a little bit of that. In other words, you may want a little bit of motion here to get your swing stroke, but you don't want to take it up too high this way. We talked about that earlier. Again, it could be a combination of this movement in your wrist this way, a little bit of movement this way, and a little bit of elbow. And you're going to find great players that will always lean more toward one than the other. And so don't think that you got to do it. There's any one way to do that. Same thing is going to happen with your left hand. You're just going to want to be relaxed. And have your fingers, try to have them as close to a right angle to the fingerboard as you can. In other words, you don't want your fingers just lying on the fingerboard this way. You want to get them up, have your knuckles not quite at a 90-degree angle, but that way you're getting pressure down on the string instead of trying to pull it towards you this way. You're getting the power this way, and again, if you have your thumb in the right place, you're really getting a lot of pressure that way, okay? You just want to think in terms of being very fluid. You know, again, like a baseball pitcher, they don't tend to be, you know, real muscle-oriented guys. They don't have, they're not just ripped in their arms because they still want to be pretty loose. It's not a strength thing. It has to do with, you know, fluid motion and that kind of thing. So, anyway, I want to wrap up with that, and appreciate you joining us in this video and book, and good luck with everything. Have fun.